You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. We are approaching July 4th, and I want to touch on that because July 4th of this year is extremely important. First of all, there are rumors, and let's just call them rumors, because at this point, that's all they are rumors. And that is rumors of potential disruption, some mass chaos event, or other things happening on or around July 4th of this year. So our response to that should not be to give into a spirit of fear, because that just spreads panic, hopelessness, and all of the things that our spiritual enemy wants to do among us. So we need to resist the temptation to give into a spirit of fear. And we need to be active in not only praying for ourselves, our families, and our loved ones, but we need to be active in terms of the Lord's recruitment by the power of his Holy Spirit to galvanize us into a team that prays together. And we're not helpless. We're not hopeless. We have spiritual weapons. And so we employ those spiritual weapons. We pray for the peace and safety of our communities and our land. And we bind the principalities and powers that would attempt to infuse destruction of any kind. So we're never passive in the great spiritual warfare. When Jesus Christ said, "Occupy until he comes," that's exactly what he means. He didn't say, "Fall asleep until I come," or "be passive until I come." He said, "Occupy until I come." So once again, there have been a number of reports based on allegations, based on people's spiritual feelings, quote, I put feelings in quotation marks, that say, well, something big is going to happen. Well, we don't know if something big is going to happen or not. There's a probability of something happening. There always is. July 4th, of course, is a key date because it celebrates and focuses on the uniqueness of America, our Judeo-Christian heritage, and the whole reason God raised up America. So July 4th, in that sense, becomes a very important day. And I want to link that to several experiences I've had regarding July 4th over the last number of years. So we'll get into that. But first, I want to get into, let's call it, understanding the world we live in a higher level of understanding, a higher level of consciousness. Because you can't win or be victorious in the spiritual battle, both as an individual or as a group. You can't win the spiritual battle if you are ignorant of the multi-dimensional nature of the spiritual battle. In other words, you have to be brought up to speed. Otherwise, you're going to get taken down before you realize any victories, either personally or collectively. So we're going to take a deep dive into that in just a moment, and then connect some of these July 4th things that I think will be of interest to you. You're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. Be sure to visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a moment. You are now listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. This is Paul McGUIRE. So as we were talking a moment ago about July 4th, and I don't want to repeat the whole story of July 4th because I've told it a number of times on the program. So I'll give you a really short version. And that is from a backdrop. Every one of us have a plan for our lives that God has given us before the foundation of the world. Now, I didn't fully understand that plan for my life, and I'm still in the process of unraveling the plan. It's becoming clearer and clearer, and that's probably the way it is going for most of you, because we live in a secular society which indoctrinates us from the youngest of ages not to believe in God, not to believe that God has a plan for our lives. And if you do dare to believe that God has a plan for your life, you will experience negative reinforcement, either deliberately or unconsciously, by the people around you and the culture around you. They will give you frowning looks. They will give you looks of disbelief if you happen to mention God's plan for your life. The society as a whole, like the media conglomerate groupthink, group tank industry of film, music, TV, etc., the collective mindset that they uphold and massage into our brains morning, noon, and night They tell us to think a certain way, to believe a certain way. They create laughter and social rejection if you don't march in lockstep, or should I say goose step, into their ways of living and doing things. Now, of course, if you dissect their ways of living and doing things, you discover that they have no clue whatsoever what they're talking about, that they embrace falsehoods and lies and half-truths with a vengeance, and that they are essentially a car wreck waiting to happen, a fatality waiting to happen, because they have no linear, coherent, logical, rational view of life or the universe. They have a bunch of fairy tales and myths, like this constantly promoted mythology of Darwinian evolution, which demands that you believe the lie that the human race came about through a series of genetic accidents over a period of 200 million years in a random chance series of events. We went from pebble to molecule to amoeba, and then as 200 million plus years rolled by, we finally evolved out of absolutely nothing through random chance. We evolved into the first human beings. What a crock. I mean, really, anybody who has even an ounce of a brain can tell instantaneously by looking simply at the argument of design that the theory of evolution is a farce, a total farce. And it's nothing more than a pretext or a pretense by which an elite, a secretive elite, attempts to rule and gain control over our lives. Now, I prefer, not because I just, quote, prefer it, but I prefer to embrace and believe in the biblical account of creation, an intelligent design designed by a creator, capital C, creator God, the infinite personal living God of the universe. You just look at human beings, you look at the earth, you look at the complexity, the engineering marvels, the intelligence behind every facet of human life, and it's both stunning and amazing at every level. And to just erase all of that and replace it with the most concocted, half-baked theory is an assault on everybody's God-given intelligence. But you see, they want us to believe that. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. Whether it's the best for us is irrelevant. The only question is by programming that series of belief systems into us, is it good for them? Does it enhance their ability to control the mass populations on planet Earth? And yes, it does, because when you dumb people down through social engineering, when you dumb down people who don't understand that they were created in the image of God, are far easier to control and manage than people who are self-aware, who have intelligence and know how to use it, who have perception and know how to use it. So this is the struggle that we're involved in right now, even as I'm speaking to you, to disseminate this information, the truth, as fast as possible, as far and wide as possible, knowing full well that even from the moment you begin communicating truth to people, and then you amplify the amount of people that you're communicating truth to, you need to be prepared from the very beginning and understand that you're going against the grain of society. You're not, quote, going with the flow. You're going against the flow because you're swimming upstream, because you're swimming in the direction of truth and eternity, whereas they're like in a free fall. All they do is let go, and they're plummeting downwards. They're in a downward collective spiral, which will eventually end up in some kind of disintegration, or, to put it more bluntly, non-existence. Their goal, whether they admit it or not, is non-existence, at least for you and I and the masses. Okay, so let's look at some of the technological instruments, the technological and spiritual tools that are being used against us, and we need to become aware of that. So let me give you a couple of reasons why. Within what's called the evangelical Christian community, and that's just one community among many in America, but you have people who claim to be prophets, who claim to see the future, who claim that God spoke to them, and they're raised up and they give all kinds of answers. But the problem is that the people that they're speaking to are often not sophisticated in understanding the fact that there are all kinds of technologies and sciences that are fully operational now that can be used secretly to embed messages, dreams, visions, God speaking to people on an individual level. In other words, just because somebody claims that God took them up to heaven and showed them what was going to happen in the earth over the next few years, just because somebody says Jesus came to them or an angel came to them and showed them what was going to happen in America and the world, just because somebody claims to have had all kinds of supernatural phenomena open up to them, doesn't mean in the final analysis that these supernatural events that they claim to have had happen to them are actually valid supernatural events. There is a high probability, if not even a high likelihood, that much of this so-called futuristic information, prophetic information, maybe, I'm not saying it's always the case, but what I'm saying is maybe attributed to the usage of advanced technologies that are well known in circles where people are intelligent and informed, but they're not that well known in circles where people have been dumbed down and where people have not sought out the truth. So let's look at some of these technologies and find out what they do. Now, of course, what goes along with this is you have to be able to document. You have to be able to prove that what you're saying is true. It can't be just some made-up paranoia theory in which you, in a spirit of fear, give way to kind of an imagination that runs amok. You have to be able to prove and document scientifically and logically that these technologies are in use, that they're real, and that they are being used against selected individuals and selected population groups. So I'll give you just one example among many. And we've discussed this man before. He lectures, his lectures are on YouTube, and he speaks often about these supernatural events that are created by technologies. And so it's important to understand that this guy is not just making this stuff up out of the blue. He is lecturing at military academies, scientific academies, and he speaks to very high-level people in the areas of his field of study. So let's examine a little bit of what this rather famous person in certain circles has to say. Okay, so I'm reading from an article in Global Research, and which has a good series of articles on kind of intelligence, AI, surveillance. And this is an article from Peter Koenig and Michael Welch entitled Dangers of Coalescing Artificial Intelligence, Digitization, 5G Ultra Microwaves, and the Great Reset, alias Agenda 2030. So we have to take seriously that Agenda 2030 is actually happening, because it is happening. And to put it in a nutshell, one of the end games for the agenda is the Great Reset, and the Great Reset is about a total control grid placed over humanity, a total control grid embedded into the minds and hearts of mankind via technology. Wireless technology is the name of the game. This experimentation and this technology originally began with electrodes being implanted in the skull of people, and then people would hear voices and stuff like that. But you can see TV shows, big-time mainstream network television shows, some of them which are very popular. But if you're paying attention while you're watching these programs, they're disclosing all kinds of information. So, for example, the hit TV series NCIS, which unfortunately you can only watch in reruns now. But NCIS, was a police, Navy, cops, high-end special agents who were trained in high-end stuff. And during the course of the shows, when they're examining the dead bodies of people and stuff like that in the series, often, or not often, but on a regular basis, when somebody's operating on a body after the person has died in the morgue, they'll find evidence of a microchip implant. And it's the famous picture of the microchip implant that I've written a lot about in my books at paulmcguire.us. And it looks like a capsule, like a little bit large capsule. One half of it's red, one half of it is kind of like translucent. And it's a wireless transmitter and a wireless receiver. Now, that's one of the earlier releases of a microchip implant. But discussing and showing and talking about microchip implants and related subject matters is part of the narrative of NCIS and many other police shows. So, yeah, it's being hidden from you to some degree, but maybe to a larger degree, it's not being hidden from you. It's being shown to you right in front of your face. It's just that most people go into kind of an overload. They can't handle it, so they have to put it in a shoebox somewhere in their subconscious mind and pretend that what they really saw, they didn't see. Okay, so now, since the NCIS series is no longer producing new shows, which is unfortunate because it basically was one of the best network series out there ever. And it's been replaced by politically correct garbage, weak writing, and just a cesspool of amateur talent in writing, producing, and directing, which seems to be the collective demise of Hollywood as a whole. And that's why people are asking the question. They're not saying anymore, is God dead? This is really kind of ironical. They're not saying, is God dead? They're saying, they actually are saying this, is Hollywood dead? Or Hollywood is dead. So it moved from a question, is Hollywood dead, to now they're saying Hollywood is dead. And by that they mean it's bankrupting itself because it produces worse than horrible films, TV shows, and music. I mean, emptiness to the point that it's painful to watch, and millions of people are tuning out. They can't watch the garbage, like me, like you. Okay, so Peter Koenig in this article and Michael Welch are talking about the proliferation of AI, artificial intelligence, and technological advances in the whole field of things like microchip implants. And Peter Koenig, who I've met and spoken, we've both spoken together. I mean, not together, but we've shared the same stage at Bible prophecy conferences. He says this is very, very interesting what he's saying. Let me begin by saying that we are about the fifth or sixth civilization that has inhabited this planet in the past several 100,000 years. Now, that is a mind-blowing statement. That statement is like a detonation, a complete and total detonation of the artificial ceiling that exists in most people's minds. Peter Koenig is coming out and giving you a gigantic clue regarding things like prehistory and a gigantic clue about the real truth of humanity on planet Earth that has been covered up for thousands of years. Now, Peter Koenig is not some, bozo the clown writer who's scrambling to find the latest bits of sensationalism. I respect him as a writer and a researcher, and he documents the stuff that he says. So we're not going to do a show on that, what he said right now, but we have dealt with it, but we're going to deal with it on a deeper level coming up on new Paul McGUIRE Report programs. Okay, so all of these previous civilizations, according to Koenig, previous super civilizations, that's what he's talking about, have died out or committed suicide with technological advances, he says. More technology, more materialism, and less spirituality. That's exactly America, the EU, and the Western world in a nutshell right now. Koenig continues, materialism is seductive. Yes, it is. You just drive around California. Everybody has a high-end, really fancy car. I'm talking about SUVs, the hot brands, at least in California. And they can't afford it. You say, well, how do you know that? Because on a number of my radio shows, I used to have a lot of automobile dealerships advertising on my shows, and I would get to know some of the owners and general managers of these automobile dealerships. And I would say stuff to them like, how can people afford these cars that they're buying? Because I was curious. I know roughly what people make in different fields. And he said, Paul, they can't afford it. They're just buying them anyway. Okay, so that's a side trail, but it's interesting to note. But that's because materialism is seductive. You know, when you buy a high-end car, at least in California, you're intentionally messaging to everybody that, you know, you have status, you know, you've arrived, that you're a player, and you know how it goes. Okay, so he's speaking of materialism being seductive, and he talks about technological advances that are not necessarily advances, but it allows an ever smaller elite to possess even more material goods and eventually to control those who have less or no material goods. From what we know, civilizations have been equally or more advanced technologically than we are in different ways. They had technologies we dream of, but don't know how to activate them, like free energy all around us, which is true. I've written about it in a number of books. We have had, ever since Tesla, and before, by the way, through scalar technology, free energy. But that free energy was covered up by billionaires at the time who wanted to maintain a monopoly on money they could make selling energy to the masses. So the elite, which are the billionaire, trillionaire class, that own everything, control everything, they want to dominate us, and they become spiritually sick, according to Koenig. I would say he's being polite. They're more than sick. When you start worshiping Satan and Lucifer, you're beyond sick. You are floating into the ether of a demonic chaos that the Bible describes as hell. Okay. And Koenig says these people become dangerous to themselves and humanity, and they are going to do everything they can to dominate the rest of mankind. And that's what we see happening right now. It used to be in previous centuries, in previous generations, that the elite classes, to one degree or another, it was never great, admittedly, but the elite classes at one time used to adapt their behavior according to what the French used to call noblesse oblige. Noblesse oblige, which means the obligation of the nobility. And this was adopted by the nobility in America, the nobility all around the world, to one degree or another. But noblesse oblige implies that when you are nobility, because of your wealth and power, you have a moral obligation to lift up and help your fellow man and woman who may not have the benefits that you have. You have an obligation because you recognize that your nobility is not a given, it's a privilege. Well, a long time ago, society lost that noblesse oblige philosophical concept from the French. You don't see it in America with the trillionaires and the billionaires, the tech giants and all the rest. I see fake noblesse oblige where they donate millions to some politically correct agenda like vaccinations, which is really a double-edged sword. I mean, they proclaim they're doing it for mankind's good and betterment, but is that really their motivation, or is their motivation more realistically hardcore euthanasia, which means you terminate anybody you don't consider productive for your new world order, or who won't serve you well as a slave in your great reset. Okay, now, so we are at the crossroads. Supposedly, the super civilization Atlantis, which I've written about in my books too, like Prophecy of the Future of America, Power from On High, the greatest battle for the hearts and minds of mankind in the history of the world. I believe Atlantis existed as a super civilization. But all the historical reports I've read regarding Atlantis was that the elite that ruled Atlantis, they were called the philosopher kings or the god kings. And they were a tiny minority, a scientific philosophical elite that believed they were genetically superior than the masses. And so they were the rulers, the ultimate rulers of Atlantis. But they became cruel, they became depraved, they became immoral, and they began to do extremely evil things with their wealth and their technology and power. And so, as the historical legends go, there are many historical writers like Plato and others, Plato, the Greek philosopher, who maintain that Atlantis was destroyed by some kind of great flood because of the evil practices that they developed and promoted throughout the world. And that, when you look at the history of other super civilizations, you see the same dynamic and pattern. The elite are finally judged for their evil. They can't get away with it forever. And so we are at that exact same crossroads now with America, the EU, the globalist elite trying to take over the planet. We're at the same crossroads as Atlantis and other. We are a super civilization, by the way. We're actually slow in the discovery of some of the technologies, but we are a super civilization. Okay, and what seems to be driving our ability to be a super civilization and the crossroads that it's brought us to is things which Koenig and others have labeled digitization, transhumanism, where a machine controls our brains, and what we call AI, or artificial intelligence. Koenig goes on, our means of exchange, we call it money, will be digitized, so it allows the elite, which controls it all, to put the population in handcuffs. Are you listening to what this guy is saying? He knows what he's talking about. I've warned about this myself many times, but we interact with people, so do you, that don't have a clue what's about to happen. And they better wake up fast because this nightmare is being assembled right in front of our eyes. So don't take it dismissively when Koenig says in his research, the elite, which controls it all, is going to put the population in handcuffs. This is not an embellishment or an exaggeration. In prison, actually, Koenig says so the elite are going to put us in an electronic prison, but it won't look like a prison. It'll look like a fun house. Are you tracking with me? So digitized money, which they will call central bank digital currency, or CBDC, will be programmable, meaning they can block it from you using it. They can make it expire at a certain point. They can, or let me say could, because we are not there yet. But let me tell you something. We're seconds away. Starve you to death by manipulating electronically your CBDC currency, your wireless currency. And we, the people, that's us in America, we're supposed to be governed by a constitution that has been stolen, or it's in the process of being stolen from us. If you think you can sit back and go to sleep while Trump does everything, and then you criticize him for what he doesn't do right, you better wake out of your lethargic state, come alive, and recognize it was never his job. It was never Trump's job to do your job, my job, and his job. He's supposed to do his job. You're supposed to do your job. I'm supposed to do my job. Very simple. Now, what Koenig described with the manipulation of the electronic currency is this, that you're looking at it coming out of America, coming out of the EU, coming out of so-called Western socialist democratic nations. You're looking at the emergence of essentially an exact duplicate of the Chinese communist social credit score system, where they dominate and control the behavior of their citizens by constant invasive surveillance. They keep a score on every citizen, and if you allow yourself to fall in your numerical score, you get punished. You can't get a home loan. You can't get a college for your kid. You can't get food. You may end up in a prison having to sell your body organs to stay alive. And worse, and worse. And if you don't think that's going to happen here, you're nuts. You know nothing about history, because the handwriting is on the wall. And if we don't warn people, if we don't wake up, and that's what a real Great Awakening is all about. It's not just a bunch of mystical experiences. A real Great Awakening is a balanced approach, both spiritually and logically, to dealing with a problem that threatens your extinction. So Koenig writes, and we the people are lied about constantly, which is true. Our government, our media is lying to us 24/7. By those who control the technology, also control what we call the media, the information system. All can be bought by material things in the case of money, what we use as an exchange system. Maybe people have heard about the Tavistock Institute, which I've written to you for years about, who also control what we call the media. Read about it. Read about it in my books. Read about it in his books. Read about it. Find out about what the Tavistock Institute does. It's a training ground for an elite control system, and it's very, very sophisticated. And notice in their own description of themselves, they call themselves the Tavistock Institute for Social Manipulation. So this describes the manipulation, how the manipulation works, so that most people have no clue how they are being manipulated right now. Tavistock is based in the UK. Its counterpart of the US is called DARPA, which stands, as Koenig says, for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is a think tank attached to the Pentagon and does many of the same things as Tavistock does. So, AI, artificial intelligence, has been in the prep stage for decades by these think tanks, and it has come to the forefront because now they are planning to use it to control human beings by embedding neural implant technology in the brains of people to control them, to read their minds, and to exploit them. Now, the gentleman I was talking about, you can see his YouTube lectures at West Point, New York Military Academy for elite military officers. His name is Dr. James Giordano. Dr. James Giordano is an expert in these new technologies, and he gives lectures where he's rather candid about what they can do. In addition, Klaus Schwab, who wrote his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, and Dr. Giordano, a DARPA scientist, presents artificial intelligence and mind manipulation. Now listen carefully. The technology that they use to manipulate individual human minds on the mass level is specifically 5G microwaves with 5G microwave towers. And then coming very soon, according to Dr. Giordano, is the 6G microwave technology. And so he's teaching this. You can watch his YouTubes if you don't believe me. He's teaching it to officers of the U.S. top military academy. And according to Koenig, the Great Reset and the so-called UN Agenda 2030 will go hand in hand. The UN has years ago ceased being what most people believe it is. The United Nations, and I will add, has never been for peace on earth. It has always been a radical tool of the globalist elite. Okay. So now, according to Michael Welch, who co-authored this article with Koenig, artificial intelligence was on the agenda of the Bilderberg Conference in Lisbon, Portugal. And Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, which founded new artificial intelligence technology, was an attendee of Bilderberg. He previously testified in front of the U.S. Senate Judiciary Commission on Artificial Intelligence, or the AI Commission. He chairs Bilderberg, and Henry Kissinger has taken a great interest in AI as well. So with all these developments, you need to be concerned about where AI is heading. Now, Peter Koenig adds, AI is primed to control surviving humanity. Quote, surviving because as you know, one of the key objectives of the Great Reset is massive population reduction. And the pursuit of this target is in the process of happening thanks to forced vaxes upon a fake pandemic so well marketed with fear and threats, of course, lots of money, that most people were fooled by it. See this revealing admission of a BlackRock recruiter. Remember, BlackRock is one of the top 3 financial investment firms. BlackRock, along with 2 others, control all the wealth of the world, essentially. That's how powerful they are. And so 11 minutes into this video, a BlackRock recruiter says most people were injected with different kinds of poisonous concoctions that causes different kinds of diseases, many, if not most, mortal diseases, cancers of all sorts, mostly affecting reproductive organs of both men and women. other injection types are sterilizing women. That has already been noticed, as birth rates in Germany and most European countries have gone down drastically. Others, maybe most, were also injected with graphene oxide. You need to memorize that word, graphene oxide. It's a metallic substance that can be embedded in the body for the purpose of receiving microwave signals or transmitting microwave signals, but it has a nasty habit of clogging up arteries and veins and other blood-carrying vessels. Graphene oxide, pay attention. It's a key component of the mysterious compounds that are found in the vaxes. And the electronics that aims to manipulate people's minds and also making humans into transhumans. It gets far more sober and serious. I've talked about this a lot, and I'm going to pause at this particular moment. We'll pick it up later. But at some point, you're going to have to come to the place in your own mind and with your own research. You're going to have to come to the place and recognize that this is not, some paranoia festival. This is the truth, and you got to face it, and you got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. That's what this is all about, dealing with it. Once again, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Okay, so in 2023, 2024, and really skyrocketing in 2025, we have a major development in AI and artificial intelligence. We have a major development that occurred in robotics and clones and androids that will blow your mind. And if you're not ready for it, you're going to be caught by surprise. Okay, so the first thing you have to understand is people now, if assuming you have the money or credit, you can have your own hyper-realistic robot copy. Okay, so they can construct a robot, a totally lifelike robot, even moves lifelike, but it will be you. The facial expressions, the face, the weight, it'll be essentially an exact duplicate of you. This is not something that's coming. This is something that has arrived now. Hyper-realistic robot copy of you. So, use your imagination. You've seen these pictures of presidents and vice presidents and very powerful people, and you're wondering, are they wearing some kind of mask like in a Tom Cruise movie where the bad guys were wearing masks, lifelike facial masks? Are they wearing masks? Is that really Joe Biden, or is that a clone? Or I'm going to throw in a new one. Is it not a clone? Is it Joe Biden in the form of a lifelike, hyper-realistic, lifelike robot with his face, his mannerisms that can move around and talk? Now, you may have to play with the camera angles to hide any, mistakes, but that technology is here. Lifelike, realistic appearance of robots. So here's just the beginning. This is a video, and I can't play you the pictorial part, but I just want you to get a feel for how serious this is. I'm playing for you the beginning of this goes back to 2023. I have other videos in front of me that go to our 2025. This is China's largest robot exhibition. Okay, so they're very serious about an AI robot takeover. So let's see what this will play like.
The World Robot Conference 2023 was held in Beijing, which became the largest in its history. 7 days instead of the usual 45,000 square meters, more than 160 companies and more than 600 robots, almost 60 of which were presented to the public for the first time. In addition, more than 300 international experts came to Beijing after the lifting of anti-cowboy restrictions. What struck our film crew most of all at the exhibition was the great variety of humanoids and bionic robots, which quite predictably became the main hits of the exposition. But first things first.
Okay, so I've seen these robots before, okay? But this is mind-blowing because they have come such a long way from the earlier prototypes. They are literally, it's not an exaggeration, they are hyper-realistic robots, and you can buy a hyper-realistic robot copy of yourself, including your facial expressions and everything about you. The realistic appearance of robots at this convention startled the attendees. Imagine living in a world where a robot copy of you is indistinguishable from you. I mean, it's here. I don't think you could get away with it if you were sitting face to face with a robot talking to them. But in little 5-minute, 10-minute interactions, I think it would fool most people. Okay, so what these robot copies have of people is they have artificial general intelligence, artificial human emotions. Zero in on that. They have artificial human emotions. Emotions are being developed where humanoid robots will have intelligence beyond that of humans. They won't have intuition. They won't have a soul. They won't hear from God. They won't be filled with the Holy Spirit, but they will be formidable counterfeits. All right. Robots will also register and handle your feelings and have feelings and desires and objectives of their own. Now imagine a soulless robot, no soul, no intuition, no love of God, no spiritual love, running around, and it can act on its own desires. Well, what if it finds just logically that you and me or parts of the human race are a threat to its existence, and then it goes on to a secret plan to terminate us? I mean, don't think that couldn't happen. It could very well happen because there's no accountability. There's no checks and balances. And robots, robot armies, robot spies can be employed by government and others without you knowing it. It's like the world of Blade Runner. Ridley Scott directed the movie Blade Runner. Or also I, Robot, which was written from a novel by the great science fiction author Isaac Asimov. The Blade Runner and I, Robot have come into reality. So this it's not the world that it used to be. So we need to be prepared for it. And if we don't stand up now in an organized, intelligent manner, become fully aware of what's happening, we are going to be in chains, okay? That's not an exaggeration, because massive globalistic corporations only care about one thing: making money and profit. It's far cheaper for the globalistic elite to hire robot workforces that'll work 24/7 than to pay for the insurance, the medical, and to try to meet the needs of human employees. It's all about profitability, making money. So if our politicians don't super aggressively wake up and start demanding that globalist or corporate employers or business employers of all kinds start to have quotas and make room, create room for human employees, protect the jobs, protect the wages of human employees. Because right now, you know and I know, the Democrats and the Republicans are doing next to nothing. And the hour is very late. They're doing next to nothing in terms of demanding that these monopoly corporations, these big tech corporations, and all the corporations that would replace human being employees for robots, they are essentially being given a free pathway to total slavery and control of the job market. If we don't demand that our elected representatives actually represent us, especially in protecting us, mitigating legislation, making sure ironclad legislation is implemented that will protect your job, my job, our family's jobs, and in the future. God did not create robots, clones, humanoids, cyborgs in his image. God did create men and women, human men and women in his image. God, from the very beginning with Adam and Eve, notice that God, who is the true owner, the highest authority in the universe, God did not replace Adam and Eve with a clone or a robot. The fall of man occurred, but God created paradise, the Garden of Eden, for Adam and Eve and their descendants. God prioritized Adam and Eve because they were made in his own image. God prioritized Adam and Eve because they were fully authentic human beings and they had souls. These soulless elite rulers have no regard for God and the authority of God. They want to replace us. God is not going to replace us, but they want to replace us. Therefore, whether they admit it or not, they're acting as if they were the agents of Lucifer and a Luciferian takeover of planet Earth. Okay, so most people don't understand that these robots have artificial human emotions, artificial intelligence, artificial general human intelligence. And the plan is to replace costly human employees with a robot humanoid workforce. So, hiding your head in the sand, being stupid, not being aware of the very realistic dangers that are literally on the horizon will mean our termination. This is all part of this beast system that's being erected. Now, I have never said that we can reverse Bible prophecy. Please get that through your head. I've never advocated, nor have I ever said we can reverse Bible prophecy. But don't misconstrue Bible prophecy to mean that we should be fatalistic and accept the chains of slavery and go off into the technological gulags of a run-amok mankind and a globalist elite that's secretly worshiping Lucifer and Satan. That is not what God has planned for the human race. What God has planned for his elect, those people who are truly saved by faith and the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses them of all sin. What God has in mind for all truly saved human beings, men and women, is the gift of eternal life, a brand new glorified body, guaranteed entrance into the kingdom of heaven, where we will rule and reign in kingdom authority with Jesus Christ from the throne room of God, and we will be given a vast material and spiritual inheritance that we will enjoy in our relationship with God. And God is love. God is not some depersonal robot manufacturer. All right, this is the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. Be sure to visit paulmcguire.us. I need your help in getting this message out as far and wide and as fast as possible because the clock is running out. I need you to go to paulmcguire.us, pray, ask the Lord what you can do in terms of a contribution or a gift. Ask the Lord what you should give. Whatever the Lord puts on your heart, do it. Okay, just do what the Lord tells you to do. And then be willing to electronically follow this program on the different social media sites because they're trying to, with computer bots, rig our numbers, just like they rigged the president's numbers during election time. Evil people play dirty. You know it and I know it. Rigging numbers is theft. You're trying to falsify data which could bring in money to Christian ministries and other organizations that are trying to speak truth to power. Okay, so visit paulmcguire.us and make sure you pray for us on a daily basis. This is Paul McGUIRE. We'll be back in just a second. Once again, you are listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. Okay, let's review the key bullet points. Very important. First of all, let's talk about framework, vision, worldview. What made America great, and this is a theme that you need to aggressively understand and aggressively embrace. What made America great was the fact that America was built largely upon a Judeo-Christian worldview and Christian principles, because it was the Pilgrims and Puritans, strong Bible-believing Christians, who came to America to escape religious persecution in Europe, primarily Britain. And the Pilgrims and Puritans believed that they had entered into a divine covenant with Almighty God, a covenant that would be similar in nature to the covenant that God made between himself and the physical descendants of Abraham regarding the inheritance of the promised land and the blessings and the curses. Blessings if you worship the true God and obey the true God, curses if you worship false gods. So the Pilgrims and Puritans, their strong biblical worldview permeated every aspect of the New World. And even though many leaders in this New World were Freemasons, or they were a conglomeration of Masonic beliefs, somewhat mystical beliefs, and also a strange blending of Christian and biblical beliefs, that's because the Bible was so far-reaching in its influence into every sector of society. So what happened was, because the very best schools in early America, beginning in the 1600s, going all the way through to the 1700s, the very best schools in America were those schools that were run and developed by the Pilgrims and Puritans. So the parents of our founding fathers, who may have been somewhat Rosicrucian, a little bit soft occult, Masonic, and not necessarily Orthodox biblical Christian, but they wanted their sons to have the best education available. So even though the Pilgrim Puritan schools were clearly built upon a foundation of the Bible, the parents of the founding fathers sent their sons, and in some cases their daughters, to the Pilgrim Puritan schools. So as a consequence of that, all the founding fathers, even if they weren't evangelical Christians, they were exposed via the Pilgrims and Puritans to a rigorous, deep Christian and biblical worldview. It was part and parcel of the educational system that the Pilgrims and Puritans developed. So our founding fathers, as children, were sent to universities and colleges and schools of every level where they learned things like the Abrahamic covenant, like Genesis. In fact, they had to become deep students of the Bible in order to graduate from the Pilgrim and Puritan schools. Yes, they had to go through, Greek and English study and mathematics and physics and biology and science and law and medicine and all the other fields. Absolutely. But just because those other fields were taught, the biblical-based teachings were not swept under the carpet. They were front and center. So the founding fathers were forced to be exposed to a strong biblical worldview in the Pilgrim Puritan schools that they went to. So when they were formulating the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the system that we call America, when they were in the formulation process, it's simple. What flowed out of our founding fathers, and yes, some were Christians, but not all of them were Christians. But what flowed out of our founding fathers, because they attended a Pilgrim Puritan educational system, was biblical truth, a Judeo-Christian worldview, and a deep understanding of the biblical God, the infinite personal living God of the universe. So when they created America, they created it to be unique. The whole reason America produced free people and emphasized freedom and emphasized freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and all the other protections we have in our legal system, and the things like the division of powers into separate branches of government. All of this flowed directly out of biblical thought and a biblical worldview. In fact, the only reason why the American dream was able to come to fruition in America and never seemed to be able to come to full fruition in all the other humanist nations was because America was the only nation that was built solidly on a biblical worldview, moral right and wrongs from the Bible, a biblical perspective on life and business and politics and military and everything else. And because of that, because of the rich biblical thought that was embedded in the soil of our minds and hearts, the feasibility of an American dream was made possible. The French could never duplicate that. They had no equivalent of the American dream. Russia didn't have a Russian dream. China, my God, it has a nightmare system. A nightmare system that secularists, atheists, transhumanists, and humanists want to steal our American dream and the beauty and wonder of it. They want to flat out steal it and replace it with a totalitarian, satanic humanist regime that always is a consequence of having revolutions without God, without a biblical worldview, without the Spirit of God. It's just that simple. So unless we, as the children of God, develop a biblical worldview as vigorous as the Pilgrims and Puritans did, and unless we stand for truth aggressively, peacefully, and in a law-abiding manner, but nevertheless we choose to stand for truth, when we choose to stand for truth and rely on the power of the Holy Spirit, we will be able to roll back the dark spiritual oppression that seeks to engulf us even now. And the hour is late, and you and I need to respond to the call of the Holy Spirit to rise and assume our place of authority, our place of rulership as servant kings and servant queens in the Spirit of Jesus Christ, because God is love. This is the Paul McGUIRE Report. I'm Paul McGUIRE. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, you're listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report. My goal, your goal, I believe that the Lord has put this on my heart. He put it in my heart. Well, we'll get into that story. Literally, the birthing of the burden I have for America, for God, for you, your families. I don't have to do this. And I'm not complaining about it because I want to do this. But I don't have to do this. I could have chosen a far more comfortable life. I could have chosen a life that was far more affluent. No, I'm not going to get into what I've sacrificed. You've sacrificed too. But the point is that I have to do what God's called me to do. I mean, I don't understand people who don't want to do what God's called them to do. And God created America with a unique vision. It's not an exaggeration to say that America has a special plan. It does. It's all over its history. There's no other nation like that except the nation of Israel. Okay, so in the 1970s, I was a young man growing up in New York City, radical in the counterculture, taking LSD, hanging out with Dr. Timothy Leary of Harvard, the LSD professor, demonstrating with the radical activist Abby Hoffman in Central Park, New York City. I mean, tens of thousands of people would come out to some of these demonstrations, and some of the bigger demonstrations would block off whole avenues of Manhattan, and you'd have 100,000 people in the streets of Manhattan. There were other demonstrations I went to, anti-war demonstrations, where we went. It was called the March on Washington, and there was like 1 million of us that went down to Washington to protest the Vietnam War. And we stayed in liberal churches and stuff like that. I was involved in those things. You've heard me talk about this before. And then my major at the University of Missouri was filmmaking. I had a dual major and altered states of consciousness, which was a brand new field within the psychology department. Okay, so many things happened in my life at this time period, which caused me to accept Christ. The Lord would open up my vision to see things that my intellectual ability, I didn't have enough information because information was being hidden from me to see what was really going on. So very, very early in my pilgrimage, if you will, I discovered that these people who I thought naively were my heroes, Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet. At the same time, I was a young man going to the East Village listening to Allen Ginsberg, a radical poet. George Soros was in those same meetings. He was older than I am, obviously, but George Soros was in these same meetings. Of course, George Soros was tapping into billions of dollars. I was just an ordinary person. But he was there in those meetings. I was at the first Earth Day meeting that was planned in Manhattan, New York City. All the radical activists were there, the big-time radical activists and big-time rock stars and stuff. So I walked into a large tent, and all the leaders of the Earth Day demonstration or celebration or whatever you want to call it were meeting there. And why would I remember this? I wasn't even a Christian when I heard this, but it was like a photograph. It just burned into my brain along with an audio recording. And I heard these radical leaders say this out loud in this meeting in a tent during the Earth Day celebration in Manhattan. They said, I'm paraphrasing, now that the Vietnam War is winding down, the radical movement, they used to just simply call it the movement, but they meant the revolutionary radical movement to overthrow America as we know it and replace it with a socialist/communist regime. I was too naive, like many people. I didn't get that part. For some reason, I was blinded to the harsh realities that this wasn't just a positive, organic, utopian movement based on love. I was so naive, I actually thought it was based on love. And then the Lord began to take the blinders from my eyes, and I could see what it really was. What it really was is it was a masquerade, because it was really being used by communists and revolutionaries to overthrow America as we know it. I didn't know that back then. So I heard these radical leaders talk about the future of the movement. And they said, the Vietnam War is winding down. If we keep attaching ourselves to the Vietnam movement, the movement will be over because there won't be any funding, energy, excitement, or interest in an anti-war movement once we've finalized the end of the Vietnam War. So we need to begin now operationally and planning to pivot our movement into an ecological, environmental movement. And then the leaders said that, so what we need to do is start planting the seeds of environmentalism, ecology, and we need to connect our movement, the movement, with radical environmentalism and radical ecological movements. And that's what they did. They knew the Vietnam War movement was coming to an end. All the rock songs and the demonstrations and the protests and the massive TV publicity they got was gonna all wind up but they saw what they needed to do to grab hold of the future. They needed to attach themselves to the latest and greatest movement, which was the environmental movement. So that was the real purpose of Earth Day. It was the real purpose of all these Earth Day celebrations that have been going on around the world, and the purpose of the environmental movement and global warming and climate change treaties with the United Nations. The real purpose of all this, the hidden agenda behind all this, was to take all the interest and the energy from the radical anti-war movement of the 60s, protesting the Vietnam War, and then funnel that movement into the environmental, ecological, and at that time it was called global warming movement. And so all these leaders rebranded themselves as environmentalists. Green, that was the name of it, green. And I heard this repeated. I was on public transportation in New York. I think I was in a bus somewhere going into Manhattan. And I was overhearing these two businessmen wearing suits on their way to work, commuting, talking about business. And one businessman said to the other one, we need to change our advertising, our marketing, and the new thing in advertising, marketing, selling, and investments is to connect it with green, environmentalism, fighting global warming. So you see, these were just, well, they were deeper than random chance things that happened to me. I believe to whatever degree they involved synchronicity, where it appears to be a random thing you're involved in, but there's really a deeper hidden spiritual plan unfolding. I believe the Lord allowed me to be in that meeting of the radicals in the first Earth Day celebration in Manhattan. And I also believe the Lord had me hear the conversation between those two businessmen. In fact, it wasn't just a bus they were commuting to. We were in a bus going to a major airport. They were going to fly to go to a business convention. I was flying, I think, to go back to the University of Missouri. But I overheard that important conversation. Okay, also during this time period, even though it wasn't public awareness, I began to realize that people like my so-called heroes, like Dr. Timothy Leary, that he was really funded, and his whole mission was the creation of the CIA in conjunction with his connection to Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, who was promoting the idea of a scientific dictatorship and the usage of psychedelic drugs to transform the people into accepting, get rid of the old, technology, rational, logical America, and turn it into a mystical, tribal, easy to control, easy to manipulate the minds of the people America, especially once you start drugging them with psychedelics. I discovered early on, ran into Ken Kesey, one of my heroes, author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And Ken Kesey, who I thought was just a psychedelic author, traveled around in a psychedelic Dayglow bus holding what were famously called the electric Kool-Aid acid tests. He was the guru of the Grateful Dead, and he was my hero. A lot of these people were my heroes. I had really bad choices in heroes. And so I ran into Kesey in the middle of nowhere in Central Park. He was supposed to be hiding so people wouldn't bother him. And because I have a photographic memory, I recognized the person he was sitting with instantly. It was Paul Krasner, who in the East Village was famous for being Krasner was the editor of Ramparts magazine, a socialist, radical magazine. But it was socialist. And so Krasner was having a meeting with Kesey in Central Park, out in the open. They were hiding out in the open. But you see, I understood just from glancing and talking to them. It was like I was able to read their souls, in the sense that I thought Kesey was a hero. After this encounter of meeting with him and Krasner, I wasn't so sure that Kesey was a hero. It seemed to me that he was a sellout. I wasn't so sure that Leary was a hero. It seemed to me he was a sellout. And then things happened to me. University of Missouri. I answered brochures were put up all over the university about an upcoming anti-war demonstration to protest the Vietnam War. It was shortly after this, it wasn't all that long after that I was drafted, and I was on my way to Vietnam after a verbal altercation with the general, the commanding officer running the entire, I don't know what they call it, where they transfer citizens into soldiers. Anyway, I went down to St. Louis and had a very foolishly decided to get into a verbal argument with the general, who basically roasted me and made sure I was on my way to Nam. But a month or two later, mysteriously, the draft was canceled. It was over. They stopped drafting people for the Vietnam War. So even though I was slated to go to Vietnam, I didn't go because the draft was ended. But I remember attending this demonstration, and you had to go to a pre-meeting before the demonstration. And the guy who ran the demonstration he looked like he was military, FBI. There was no way you could talk or look at this guy and believe he was a radical hippie or an Abbie Hoffman type merely organizing an anti-war demonstration. It was obvious to me, painfully obvious to me, that he was an intelligence agent of some kind working for the U.S. government, most likely the CIA or the FBI. And they were deliberately trying to manufacture a crisis. And then I discovered that many of the biggest anti-war leaders and demonstrations and celebrities, anti-war celebrities and movement celebrities that were being artificially platformed, were in fact secretly being financed by the CIA, by Rockefeller, by the Rockefeller brothers, and big billionaire money, big Wall Street money was secretly financing the movement because they wanted to create their cultural revolution for America. And that began to open my eyes. And so when I see the Great Reset today, it's the same plan that they were working on in the anti-war movement of the 70s and the 60s. It was the Beatles. The content of the Beatles' lyrics were not written by the Beatles, like Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine is an anthem to the New World Order. It was written by a socialist genius activist who eventually bought the rights to the Beatles' music before, what's his name, who Michael Jackson did, who owned Never Never Land Ranch. Okay, so I began to learn what was that all is not what it seems to be. Now, I'm bringing you to this place. All of this has continued on. The environmental movement, the green movement, the ecology movement. Huge promoters of it are the United Nations, the Rockefellers, the global elites, the global billionaires, the global trillionaires, people like the Rothschilds. They are financing this. The Canadian billionaire. I write about this in my books in heavy detail at paulmcguire.us. And I got tons of free articles at paulmcguire.us. So they are using this same rationale to fool people, to deceive people today. And it's all encapsulated by that lie slogan created by Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, or the WEF, when he said, "You will own absolutely nothing." That is word for word out of the Communist Manifesto, and word for word a propaganda line used by communist revolutionaries in every communist revolution. "You will own absolutely nothing" is straight out of the communist playbook. And then it comes with the accompanying lie. You will own absolutely nothing, but you will never be happier in your whole life. That is a lie from hell. Satan is the father of lies. You look at history, it's a flat out lie. When you own absolutely nothing, you are never, ever, ever happier in your whole life. And then look at the globalist elite, the billionaire trillionaires with their $500 million yachts and their 20 mansions and palaces scattered throughout the world. They have 30 cars that are worth anywhere from $300,000 to $1 million in their garages. They live like kings and queens, beyond kings and queens. And the Great Reset is just the New World Order. Remember that. So a lot of this stuff, which appears to be liberalism or whatever it appears to be, is not what it is. It's a subterfuge. And so on the next program, I'm going to take you to what happened to me walking the streets of Manhattan with my soon-to-be wife. We were dating, and it was July 4th, 1976, the bicentennial celebration of the birth of America being held in Manhattan. And great sailing ships came in from all over the world to circle Manhattan Island. Giant replicas of the Pilgrim boats, the Puritan boats, and the other famous sailing ships that brought the Pilgrims and Puritans to America. Replicas of the Mayflower and other boats. And giant contemporary modern boats, naval ships, as well as huge sailboats and yachts. They were all flying American flags, and it was part of this massive celebration of America's 200th anniversary. And I was holding hands with my wife, Chris, and we were walking around Manhattan. I had just become a Christian within the last year. And the Lord, once again, was using this current events spectacular happening all around me to embed in my heart and mind what was stolen from my heart and mind by both the counterculture, the media, and the educational system, which was mainly that from the very beginning, God had a supernatural plan for America. It was God who created the American dream, and America was supposed to be a light on the hill for people all around the world to want to emulate, and for nations all around the world to learn from. But you see these Luciferian billionaire trillionaires, these atheist trillionaires, these transhumanist revolutionaries, they don't like that. They want to create their own satanic New World Order or their occultic thing. I always look for proof. And I ran across a couple of days ago, it was a photograph of Rothschild, of the Rothschild financial empire. And he was standing there in plain sight with Maria Abramovic, the famous satanic artist. I don't even know if she is an artist, but she's some kind of satanic priestess. So she's a famous satanic priestess, heavily famous in Manhattan, New York City. And she's standing, both Rothschild and her are standing together. And behind them is this painting that shows a kind of androgynous figure that looks mainly male, but has some peculiar feminine characteristics. And when you look carefully at this painting of this androgynous being, which is immediately behind Rothschild and Maria Abramovic, you see this androgynous figure. And then when you compare the details in this androgynous painting, which I believe it was in one of Rothschild's, it's on display in one of Rothschild's many mansions, spectacular mansions. You see that some of the imagery in this androgynous male warrior figure, it represents Lucifer. It represents a kind of androgynous add-on of the Statue of Liberty. The musculature in the painting of this peculiar male is very, very similar to the musculature and face of the Statue of Liberty, which of course is supposed to be a female goddess. Or is it? Or is it really an androgynous goddess? And then you look at other occult pictures and you see the consistency of the occult symbolism, 7 rays. You'll see that in all kinds of occult rituals and paintings and everything else. Figures have 7 like rays of light beaming out of a head or something. 7 rays. It's 7 rays. In fact, there's a very popular, hip, organic, trippy restaurant called Inn of the Seventh Ray up in the mountains here, where it was still there. I'm assuming it's still there up in the Malibu area. Inn of the Seventh Ray, which has great food, but it goes back to some kind of occult connection maybe 40 years ago. Okay, so the other thing to understand is that this is obviously, you can't just say Rothschild is an atheist and non-religious. No, because he keeps coming out and his family members keep coming out, and what he finances, there's a consistent attachment with blatant occult Luciferian symbolism, occult symbolism, and Rothschild things that he's investing in and promoting. Now, Maria Abramovic is a renowned, and I mean it in a negative sense, satanic artist, satanic priestess of some kind. She was heavily involved in the formative stages of Lady Gaga's career. And she holds these exhibitions where her artwork, her large paintings and artwork and sculptures are displayed at these, elite exhibitions where the elite come to admire her work. But you got to ask yourself the question, why does a Marie Abramovic paint? She's not using traditional paints to paint her paintings. She's using, and forgive me, this may be offensive to young children, so I'm giving you a quick heads up to turn it down. Okay, that was your heads up. She doesn't use ordinary paints to paint her paintings. She uses paints where instead of using traditional paint, she uses human blood, animal blood, urine, semen, and other vulgar and lewd and perverse and sick components to paint her pictures. Why would you paint paintings, evil paintings, and instead of using paint, you're using human blood, semen, urine, stuff out of a female human womb? I mean, it's really an abomination. Well, because in satanic ritualism, it's all about abomination. And what was also the rage, and this was connected to Maria Abramovic in Manhattan, there were these parties at restaurants that the elite went to, and the way they would serve the food, it would primarily be a male, totally naked body laid out on a long banquet table, or it would be a female, totally naked body laid out on the banquet table. And then the couples would sit on the banquet table, sitting around these totally naked female bodies or male bodies. And they'd have their dinner plates in front of them, and then arranged artistically, if you could dare to say that, on the female body or the male body would be, bowls of grapes or caviar or exotic cheeses, et cetera, et cetera. But you see, if you have any discernment, you realize that the real purpose, I believe, or I theorize, of the fact that people are eating on living, breathing, naked human bodies is not just the titillation factor, the sexual factor, because that generates interest and sales. Hollywood, and you know how that works. That's the way Hollywood works. It's more than that. It's to get people used to, in their minds, of combining the eating of food and dinner with human bodies. It's a conditioning process, because the accusations and the whistleblowers that have come forward, if their testimonies are to be true, but there's so many testimonies of, in these dark satanic rituals, there is the practice of cannibalism, ritual baby and human sacrifice, ritual sacrifices of all kind, and eating of human flesh and blood of all kinds. I mean, really dark stuff. But see, they're not just spontaneous dark stuff. They are part of an Aleister Crowleyan ceremony. It's a ritualistic satanic ceremony. And you've heard the reports and the allegations of the elite in Hollywood, the elite in Washington, D.C., the elite are all around the world who get involved in these satanic rituals, which involve not only the sexual abuse and rape and torture of little children, baby girls, baby boys, and older ages, blood sacrifices of them, but the torture, the deliberate delighting in torturing them are the allegations. So you see that what the artist is painting and showing you openly, and you see what Rothschild and the satanic priestess are standing and what's behind them, you see there's similar themes. So a logical, rational mind has to deduct, why are the similar themes of child sacrifice, sexual abuse of young children, raping of young children, torturing, killing them as an offering to satanic gods? Why are these repetitive disclosures, allegations? In the P. Diddy trials, I'm not paying attention to them to a large degree, but I catch bits here and there, but there are accusations of the same nature. And there are accusations of natures of major Hollywood stars who allegedly are involved in this stuff. How many? I don't know. What percentage? I don't know. But one whistleblower said that the occult belief in wolves, the Nazi belief in wolves, goes back to Adolf Hitler and before. It goes back centuries, where human beings involved in ritualistic occult ceremonies are possessed by a wolf spirit, both male wolves and female wolves. And when they're let loose, these human beings possessed by a wolf spirit will consume a little baby child, boy or girl alive, or a young human being alive. People possessed by a wolf spirit will race at the child and rip the child's body to shreds with human blood everywhere. But it's a savage act because they're acting on the wolf spirit inside of them. Now, I'm saying the word allegation because I wasn't there. I do know that with the Nazis, they had women, they had men who were part of the wolf divisions, the fiercest, bloodiest, cruelest, most violent divisions of the armies of the Third Reich. But they also had what were called she-wolves, women who would act violently and with bloodlust. You know, that term bloodlust, think about it for a moment. I know you don't want to, but you have to understand what's happening. Bloodlust means you have a lust, not necessarily just for sex. You have a lust for blood, especially human blood. And then there's the allegation. I haven't seen it, so I have to describe it as merely an allegation. Excuse me. That when the billionaire class and the trillionaire class and the wealthiest men in the world met on the secluded Jekyll Island, they met secretly. Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and all the international bankers. Allegedly, they met secretly. And allegedly, they conducted human sacrifice and cannibalism. And the reason for this allegation is there's a painting or paintings of the leftover and the action of cannibalism and white, I guess formerly European settlers or people conducting ritualistic human sacrifices and sacrificing giants and sacrificing Indians and then devouring them in a satanic ritual act of cannibalism. Okay, it's disgusting. I know it's disgusting. But sometimes you have to go through disgusting to get to the truth. Okay, so could it be that because some of these archaeological ruins of human sacrifice and cannibalism were in relatively close proximity to some of the summer mansions of this globalist wealthy elite. Now, the reason these guys met there on Jekyll Island was to come up with a new economic system for America against the Constitution, against we the people. They seized total domination and control of the American money system. They stole it out of the hands of we the people, and they put it under the control of just approximately 12 international banking families. And they met on Jekyll Island to discuss the operational plan about how they were going to do this. So in the 1800s, they formulated a plan known as the Federal Reserve Banking System. And they passed it through the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. They only changed the names of the plan to fool the American people into thinking they were getting a choice. But either the Democrats or the Republicans would both finalize the globalist elite plan, which was called the Federal Reserve System, which still controls our money system today. The Federal Reserve System took illegally, but it took control of the financial system in America, which was formerly ruled by we the people. We the people were in control of the financial system. By the time the international bankers finished their dirty deal, they became in control of the financial system through what was called the Federal Reserve Banking System. Now, that was originated by the Rothschild banks in England. The Rothschild banks in England, the way Rothschild and his personal family took over all the financial systems of Europe, or most of them anyway, was through their version of the Federal Reserve System. They had independent banks that were controlled by the Rothschilds that would take control of all the money in any given European country, like England. So what they would do is they would secretly funnel the money out of the government banks of various nations, like France, like Germany, like England. They would take the monies out of the government banks of the various independent nations, and then they would funnel that money into the Rothschild-owned and controlled banks. And then that's what they did in America, except they called that system, the Federal Reserve System. So here's the thing that you need to ponder. You see symbolism of ritualistic sacrifice and Satanism, then you see the evil deeds that it produces. So everything, it appears, in our present world system is in the highest levels managed by Luciferians to one degree or another. And then the deep state, or their operatives in various forms, like the Bilderberg Group, like the Club of Rome, like Davos, like the World Economic Forum, like the United Nations, like UNESCO. All of these elites and these secret globalist groups, you see evidence of satanic worship and rituals. This is why you have to, again, ask yourself, based on facts, why did a group of people import into Manhattan, New York City, the Baal temple in the Middle East? The Baal temple, or the Temple of Baal in the Middle East, was one of the actual temples where they sacrificed human babies on the altars of Baal. Why would that be put in a prominent place on display in Manhattan? Because there's obvious a satanic connection. In the same way, in London, there also is the transportation in of a temple of Baal, Baal worship. Baal is an idol that represents Satan. Molech is an idol, a giant owl-looking idol that represents Satan. Baal worship, Molech worship, which is connected to the Bilderberg Group, Baal worship, which is connected to finances. That's why you have a bull, a bronze bull, in front of a prestigious Wall Street building. The bronze bull represents Baal. The bull and Baal are linguistically connected. Baal is the bull. Bull worship is Baal worship. So when you see the bronze statue of a bull, that represents Baal. Now, I'm not saying everybody in Wall Street is openly worshiping Baal, but there are some who are. The spirit of Baal, or satanic worship, is in there. And then Ashtaroth is a female satanic goddess where you worship Satan through participation in ritualistic satanic sexual orgies of various kinds. So this is what we are fighting in the spiritual realm. And then when you take it into the environmental movement on a spiritual level is all built upon the precept of the worship of the Mother Earth goddess. The Statue of Liberty represents the goddess religion. And the Statue of Liberty has 7 rays coming from the top of her head. And her body looks very similar to that androgynous body behind Rothschild and the satanic priestess Marie Abramovic. Because the architect and the sculpture behind Washington, D.C. was a high-level Freemason, Pierre de la Font. And the Statue of Liberty was created by the high-level Mason, Pierre de la Font. And so you see that this current world system, like the Great Reset and all the rest of that stuff, and everything they're doing in terms of minutia and biological manipulation, are all connected to satanic rituals. So where does this all go? We need to be educated and informed about the real multidimensional nature of the battle we're involved in. And then we need to fight this multidimensional spiritual battle with the only weapons which are effective, which are spiritual weapons. We need to wage an intensive spiritual warfare to drive these demonic and Luciferian forces out of our nation. If we succumb to the temptation to retreat and to be oblivious, if we succumb to that temptation, we will be, mark my words, we will be enslaved, and it will be bitter beyond any scope of the human imagination. I do not believe that in this hour that is the will of God for America or for you or me, our children and grandchildren. I believe God wants us to appropriate the spiritual weapons and power that Jesus died for on a cross so that they could be given to us freely by faith. We need to appropriate that high-level spiritual weaponry and take back what the devil has stolen. As we do that, we will see power from on high poured out upon the children of God in America. As we do that, we will see the children of God in America take back area by area, take back the geographic territories and the spiritual territories stolen from us by Satan and his principalities and powers. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. Make sure you ask the Lord what you can give And don't harden your heart when the Lord speaks to you. Give whatever God tells you to give financially as a gift. Pray in the way that God calls you to pray for me in this ministry. And then finally, pray and act and watch our back, because they're trying to rig our numbers. Join us. I believe with all my heart that with God all things are possible. And we have the victory in Jesus Christ. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.